He didn't release any information. He did not provide any citations. But his promise meant that something important was already happening. He implied publicly that the walls were closing in, which at the time sounded more like a prophecy than a joke. As the months passed, the pressure grew. More difficult questions began to be asked by the media. Former friends stopped endorsing Diddy in public. Brands took a silent step back. Then, in an unexpected turn of events, the FBI reportedly took actions that showed this was more than just a civil case. What specifically did the FBI find? Investigators reportedly discovered evidence to support a number of the accuser's claims. This contained supporting witness testimony, digital data, and financial records that corresponded with the periods provided in the allegations. Although officials have not released all pertinent information, sources claim that the evidence was adequate to justify an arrest and a continuing investigation. As news of Diddy's arrest spread, the industry came to a halt. The fans were shocked, the stars ceased to speak. Social media users' reactions varied from anger to incredulity. 50 Cent returned to the spotlight almost immediately after that. Individuals began rewatching his earlier interviews, rereading his posts, and drawing the unsettling conclusion that he might have been telling the truth all along. But it's important to be clear. At this stage, a lot of things remain accusations. Investigations are still ongoing. Diddy is entitled to due process just like everyone else. But there's no denying that the fiction of uncontested power has fallen apart. There is a backstory to every arrest. A route that twists through years of horror, silence, and influence comes after this one. The FBI allegedly discovered a pattern rather than just evidence. According to some, the industry disregarded this trend. For his part, 50 Cent was not happy. He did not declare victory. Instead, he took a step back, as if he had been waiting for this to happen on its own. Because when the truth finally comes out, there's no need to shout. It should go without saying. And this was only the beginning, because what happens next could change the music industry forever, even though the FBI's findings may explain the arrest. To understand how things got to this point, you had to understand the scope of Diddy's power at his peak. He was not merely a painter. He wasn't merely a producer. He was a system. Politics, the media, fashion, music, and the alcohol industry were all impacted by him. For many years, people believed that Diddy would always be right, no matter what was happening around him. And for a long time, that belief was accurate. Diddy established his company by controlling access. Deals were sought after by artists. Executives wanted to form partnerships. Media outlets requested interviews. Opportunities are a result of having Diddy's favor. Silently, doors would close if you opposed him. This environment, according to former industry insiders, encouraged fear of being forgotten, fear of losing one's job, and fear of speaking up. Many people think that he was shielded by this power. Any speculations that surfaced were quickly put down. They were removed from the spotlight when they talked. If accusations were made, they were settled behind closed doors. No police reports. No public trials. Just silence. For admirers, Diddy was untouchable. Many others in the sector believed that he should not be questioned. Behind the scenes, however, pressure was growing. The FBI did not act without warning, according to reports. Calmly, they watched. They examined patterns. Investigators apparently noticed that some of the charges were repeating the same details, even when the accusers were unknown. Similar locations. Comparable timelines. Similar methods of control. Law enforcement often searches for these trends to determine whether a case is isolated or part of a larger pattern. At the same time, financial investigators were reportedly conducting additional research on the subject. Diddy has complex, multi-layered, and global businesses. On the surface, everything seemed to be legal. Reports, however, indicate that some transactions were questionable. Substantial financial amounts. Agreements pertaining to confidentiality. Non-disclosure agreements related to personal disputes rather than business matters. Here, there was no indication of a crime. But it was enough to keep the research going. Then came the lawsuits. When the first major civil complaint was made public, the silence was broken. For the first time, accusations were detailed, documented, and inevitable. People began discussing as soon as the story was publicized. Some went public. Authorities allegedly received hidden aid from others. At this stage, things began to change rapidly. As he observed all of this, 50 Cent's voice became louder. He stopped making jokes and grew serious. He questioned not just Diddy but the entire system that protected him. In interviews, he talked about how powerful people stay safe for years until they don't. Speaking in front of a large audience seemed like an experience. Most individuals were not aware that federal investigators were now questioning witnesses who had never spoken previously, according to reports. A lot of people who waited for years. Those who believed nobody would listen, these testimonies, according to sources, supported assertions that were previously under investigation. Diddy's legal team, however, acted decisively. All of this was disputed by public statements. Solicitors rejected the claims as money-grabbing scams and fabrications. Supporters argue that civil cases do not imply guilt. And legally, they were right. But something felt different this time. The responses sounded defensive. The confidence was coerced. Brands started to back off. Projects were put on hold. The invitations stopped coming in. Nothing was uttered by old allies. In Hollywood, silence often speaks louder than words. People typically know something, or are afraid of something, when they cease standing up for you. According to reports, federal officials were secretly preparing their next course of action. This was no longer about a single charge. It was concerned with whether crimes had been committed over time and whether they had been covered up by intimidation, money, or power. Reports state that this was the point at which the investigation became excessive. Sources claim that digital proof was essential. Out-of-date messages, emails, information that has been preserved. People thought knowledge was lost forever. When combined with witness testimony, this data allegedly confirmed the locations and dates stated in lawsuits. Investigators are said to have verified information that was impossible to snoop on or fabricate. The wall of protection began to fall apart. For years, people believed Diddy was too big to fail, too wealthy, too linked together. But history shows that although power can delay justice, it cannot eliminate it entirely. Furthermore, once federal agents notice a tendency, they don't back down easily. When the cops eventually moved, there was no mayhem. It was prearranged. The arrest shocked the public, but cops knew it was the result of careful preparation. According to sources, they believed they had enough evidence to back up action and continue to strengthen their position. It was not the end of the story, but the start of a much longer chapter. And 50 Cent was in the spotlight once more. People began asking the same question everywhere: how did he know? He may have had inside information, according to some. Some people think he simply understood how the system worked. If you have survived the same industry, you can recognize the warning signs. The division. The silence. The tone shift. For 50 Cent, this was not surprising. Rather, it was expected. But while the public's focus was on celebrity drama, the real story was unfolding in silence. Investigators kept working. Other witnesses were reportedly being contacted. They were looking over further proof. Moreover, what had been discussed behind closed doors could no longer be kept secret. It took a while for the autumn to happen. First slowly, then all at once. And as the inquiry went on, one fact became clear: this arrest was the result of multiple men. It concentrated on the repercussions of letting power run uncontrolled for a long time. Following the arrest, the climate around the music industry underwent a significant shift. What had been unbreakable now felt fragile. Many who had been silent for years suddenly acknowledged the change in authority. After that, stories start to emerge. According to people familiar with the investigation, the FBI didn't stop working after the initial arrest. Arrests are frequently used as leverage rather than as a last resort. Investigators allegedly utilized that incident to encourage cooperation. Conversation began slowly. Some had already worked there. Some of them were painters. Some people had memories of Diddy that they would never forget, even if they had only met him once. These weren't public interviews or viral videos. Private contacts with government representatives were confirmed and recorded. What investigators allegedly found created a dreadful picture. A number of witnesses allegedly described similar experiences: fear-based control, pressure from power, and money-induced quiet. According to several, they were urged not to speak and reminded of what they would lose. But they weren't directly intimidated. Occupations. Reputations. Potential customers. In powerful circles, threats don't necessarily sound like threats. One of the most harmful aspects of the case, according to sources, was consistency. When strangers share similar accounts, investigators pay attention. The locations matched. The dates coincided. Subtle overlaps in details made it difficult to imitate. At the same time, digital forensics was said to have had a big impact. Old phones. Cloud backups. Communications that have been saved. Data that was believed to have been deleted years ago. According to law enforcement officials, some of these pieces of evidence supported the timings the accusers had given. Messages purportedly confirmed rendezvous. Travel data showed that persons were in the same locations at the same times. The puzzle started to come together gradually. As rumors of these findings spread across the company, the public's perception swiftly shifted. Social media started to change in one direction after they were split up. The audience became quiet. Defenders stopped posting. Words could no longer compete with the silence. Then came the leaks. Reporters began speaking with anonymous sources, but official information was not disclosed. Words like pattern, corroboration, and long-term behavior started to appear in headlines. The story was no longer told as a collection of distinct accusations. They were discussing it as a systemic issue. It was an important adjustment. Because the public loses faith in a narrative when it moves from one allegation to multiple confirmations. People now want to know how long it lasted rather than if anything happened. 50 Cent remained visible in spite of everything, albeit carefully. He did not divulge personal details. He kept the victims' identities a secret. Instead, he prioritized accountability. He gently reminded the audience that warning signs had long been ignored by the sector. He questioned why people don't speak up before the cops are called in one instance. It felt more like annoyance than retribution to many. Investigators also investigated if influence had been used to avoid complaints in the past, according to sources. Were reports deterred? Were settlements reached in order to avoid legal action? Was there pressure to avoid illegal activity and instead keep things civil? These investigations reportedly became essential to the case. It was clear that investigators were looking deeper, even though none of this had been made public yet. In the meantime, Diddy's legal team continued to battle hard. In statements, any wrongdoing was denied. They argued that the charges were exaggerated, taken out of context, or motivated by greed. And legally, that argument was still sound. An arrest does not result in a conviction. But perception doesn't wait for judgments. Every day that the issue was in the news, the harm grew. Interviews from the past resurfaced. Actions taken in the past were reviewed. Moments that had been overlooked were now viewed in a new light. Connections began to form on the internet, sometimes logically, sometimes hastily. This is the collapse risk. Speculation starts to bleed into reality. According to reports, federal officials were aware of this and took caution. They prioritized the evidence over noise. Their goal was not public opinion. It was building a case that would stand up in court, not creating headlines. There was still a lot of pressure. Several claimed victims reportedly came forward after witnessing the arrest. Not all of the cases went forward. Not all of the claims were verified. They have the ability to drastically change the situation, though, when a small number of confirmed testimonies corroborate the information that is now accessible. The emotional toll was evident. Former partners split up in public. Some images were deleted. Others spoke about supporting accountability in generic terms without naming specific people. In Hollywood and music, that expression often means that people are defending themselves. The question, how far does this go, kept coming up. Was Diddy the only person involved? Or was this a field that encouraged silence and punished honesty? Investigators reportedly considered whether others benefited from disregarding warnings, from encouraging conduct, or from both. That question frightened many people. Because once investigators start questioning who knew what and when, they are hard to stop. As the weeks passed, it became clear that this was not going away, this would not leave. The story had progressed to an irrevocable point. No settlement could take it away. No public relations effort could improve it. The individual who had once controlled the story was no longer in charge of it. In the midst of all of this, the silent awareness dawned. It took time to create this case. It took years to construct. Years of silence. Years of fear. Years of unchecked power. The arrest was the only spark. Then there was the fire. After the shock passed, the world was left wondering what might happen. Diddy's life had changed significantly. The man who had once controlled rooms with his presence now had to contend with an uncontrollable system. Celebrity has no effect on courts. Investigators don't care about legacy. Sources say his days became quiet, regimented, and unpredictable. He was represented by lawyers. The statements had good writing. Everything was timed. The spotlight that had once lauded him was now silently chasing him. As the litigation went on, there were noticeable changes in the music industry. Executives talked about accountability. Labels reviewed internal policies. Artists began to question established conventions and power structures. For the first time in a long time, conversations that had previously only been whispered were suddenly happening out loud. Fear's face has changed. According to reports, investigators continued their covert work. Not all accusations were charged, and not all material was released to the public. This is how the system functions. The evidence must meet standards. Testimonies must be verified. The truth must be impervious to scrutiny. Nevertheless, the notion of